Okay, so we're here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. So today I'm joined by Dr. Subaina Khalid, a graduate of Shifa College of Medicine, Pakistan, who has recently matched into internal medicine residency in the United States. She has extensive knowledge of the entire residency match process that she shares on her social media to empower and assist others. Welcome, Dr. Khalid. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Heather, for having me. It's a pleasure being here. And hopefully, we can help a lot of people out.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, for taking out your time. I understand that residency has started and you must be extremely busy. So, on behalf of all of the listeners, thank you so much.
Of course, it's a pleasure.
Let's get started with the interview. So, let's talk a bit about yourself, your background. When did you decide to pursue this USMLE journey, and like walk us through your experience?
Yeah, so I think as far as my personalized journey is concerned, I always knew that I did want to do my postgraduate education from abroad. I wasn't sure whether it's going to be the US, the UK, or Australia. Those were all viable options for me. But I think around the third year of my med school, after
Mhm.
doing extensive research on what option is the best for me, I decided that US was probably going to be the pathway I choose. It's also heavily influenced by the fact that my mother, she completed her fellowship training at Cleveland Clinic. So,
Mhm.
it was a system that I was used to. I had, childhood memories associated with it, and it was extremely fascinating to me as a kid. So I think that overall, just knowing the sort of state-of-the-art equipment that we have here, along with the sort of programs that are being designed to help residents during their training process, it was a no-brainer for me. So third year of med school is when I solidified that, US is going to be the career I pursue. And I started studying for my steps. Then on, I gave my step one while it was like a 3-digit score in my fourth year of med school, and then step two in my fifth year. And right after graduation, I applied for the match. So that's sort of how it came to be.
Okay, I mean, the thing that you mentioned, it's really interesting because when you're in med school, this is the discussion that we're used to having. Like, where should we go as international medical graduates? Do we choose the UK or the US? So there are a lot of factors that come into play and make a person's decision. So for you, what made you choose US over UK? Like, what benefits do you think that US has over UK?
Definitely. I think there are a lot of pros and cons, and these are going to be very personal for every individual. I know a lot of people would prefer the place they have more family at. I had an equal amount of family at both ends, so that wasn't like too big of a factor for me. But I think something that should be kept in mind is whenever you're going to transfer into a new healthcare system, you're putting in so much
Yeah.
effort, you're studying for the exams, and you're spending so much money. I think it's very important that you do your research well. So if you look up, what's happening with the national healthcare system in the UK currently,
Yeah.
um, there are a lot of problems associated with it. Not to say that the US healthcare system doesn't, but you need to be able to see where you might have a more stable future. For me, that seemed like the US would be more of an answer. Also, we have a lot of graduates from my med school who had already undertaken the path. So the guidance that I was able to receive regarding the US residency pathway was much more extensive in comparison to, taking the PLAB route, which I still know a lot of people do it. But for me personally, I saw most of my seniors pursuing the US pathway. Other than that, I think something that was really important was the number of years of training
Mhm.
that are required to achieve an attending position. So for example, in the US, I know that, if you get into an internal medicine pathway, that's 3 years, and then you can become a hospitalist.
Yeah.
For the UK, it's quite an extensive and
Yeah.
longer process, especially knowing that some of my colleagues who I've spoken to mentioned that there's a huge problem of a lack of attending
Yeah.
positions. So for me, I think all of these things combined made me decide that I wanted to go for the US.
I have also noticed that the tide is turning because when I was in my second year or third year, people were naturally gravitating towards the UK. But eventually, with the NHS deteriorating, people just gradually, thought about their other options and then started looking into the US. And also because some of the seniors that I talked to, they were like doctors in the US. When you're a resident in the UK, you don't really get to do much doctor stuff. You are mostly
Mhm.
doing like staff work. So that's
Yeah,
demotivating because you've been through all of your med school and you've been giving these exams and everything, and then you're not even, independently doing all the
exactly. Yeah.
investigations and diagnosis and stuff. So that's something that everyone should consider when they're, weighing out the pros and cons of going into the US or the UK. Okay. So you mentioned that you gave your steps during your fourth year, right?
So my step one during my fourth
So
year.
when
Yeah.
when would you say like students should start preparing for their steps, and what would be the ideal timeline for them?
So I think also this would be very personalized to everyone, how much time you have, how you can manage your studies, and your extracurricular activities, along with the other aspects of your application, because at this point in time, the application process has gotten so competitive that your step scores aren't going to be the only thing that's going to, decide whether or not you're going to get a residency position. But then again, I would suggest something that I didn't do: start from the very beginning, because you have these books like First Aid, Pathoma, all the different resources that hopefully we'll touch upon in the interview later. But these resources are essential. But the most important part of getting through these is that you start early, because it's not a small book and it's
Yeah.
not easy to memorize the entire thing front to back. I'm talking about First Aid. So I would suggest that you try your level best, that starting from your first year of med school, whatever section you're studying, if it's pharmacology, biochemistry, whatever it is, you try to incorporate first aid as well as pathoma in your study, so that you're used to it. By the time your
Mhm.
exam comes around, you've already gone through one pass of it.
Mhm. So yeah, let's touch upon that, the resources that you use for your exams. What would you say are the most high yield resources that every student must do? And when is it considered a resource overload? Because that's also really common.
Yeah, so I think the most important resources, I remember a lot of people giving me a huge list when I
Yeah.
started my journey, and I
Yeah.
think that happens to everyone, right? So because there's so many resources out there, but then again, some things are going to work for you that might not work for others. I applied as part of a couples match. My
Mhm.
husband didn't buy first aid, which is thought to be,
Yeah.
such a huge deal, because
Blasphemy.
first aid is supposed
Blasphemy.
to be
You haven't
so
got first
easy.
aid.
Yeah, he never bought a first aid, and I used to be so worried when he was going to give his exam. I'm just like, how are you you don't even own one. And he's like, oh, it'll be fine, because his primary resource
Yeah.
was flashcards.
Mhm.
So for me, and he used pre-made decks along with his own decks, but that worked for him because we ended up with the same score. So that goes to show that no matter what is working for you, it doesn't have to be something that's working for everyone else. What I can tell you is from my personal experience, and with the people who did it around me and did it successfully, first aid, I think if you are someone who is a visual learner, first aid is the most essential thing. It contains everything you need to know. Sometimes in the exams, I've seen like the exact pictures
Yeah.
from first aid pop up. So if you can memorize that, all well and good. Anything that you need clarification on, the concepts that I didn't understand really well, I went to Boards and Beyond videos. They would give a detailed explanation, but I wouldn't suggest doing all of the videos, because that would kind of waste your time. If you know concepts already, you don't need to go through the entire video, but try to hit anything that you need to clarify concepts on from Boards and Beyond. Other than that, I think for pathology, Pathoma is an excellent resource. It's a must do. Everyone should do it, especially like the first 2-3 chapters. They're quite essential. Microbiology, sketchy. Sketchy is, I don't think there's any other micro resource you need after you do sketchy. If you want to supplement it, some of the portions of first aid that define, the basics of microbiology, those are great. Um, I believe sketchy for pharmacology is also great. I personally didn't use it as much, but I know a lot of people who did, and it helped them out a lot. Other than that, I think your UWorld Q Bank, of course, UWorld is a must do. Now that the exam has been changed to pass fail, I remember people used to prefer going through UWorld with two passes, one being system wise and then one being random. I think with pass fail, even though you need a solid foundation, because your step two is practically based on your step one
Yeah.
exam, like 50% of it. So I would suggest that do your UWorld properly, but I don't think you need to go for two passes. One pass should be enough, especially if your base is strong.
Mhm.
If you feel like you need a lot of help, then you can go for two passes, one system wise and then randomize. But hopefully, if you finish all of these things, make your flashcards. I have a template up. If anyone wants to follow on my Instagram page, you can follow that and make your the incorrects and the flagged material that you have from your UWorld Q Bank, you can make flashcards for those. And yeah, I think that should be good enough.
Yeah, I work with a lot of students, and since I also gave my step one when it was numerical, and we do remember the stress of step one and getting to
Oh,
the highest score possible. And when I'm talking to these students, I'm still in that mentality, get
yeah,
to the most possible score. So you need to do this amount of passes, or you need to make sure that you really understand the concept. And the reaction that sometimes comes up is, it's pass fail now.
yeah,
It's fine. Even if we sometimes, students do like 60 to 70% of UWorld and they still manage to pass. So
exactly.
I think ever since we gave the exam, things have been changing a lot. And but what you said, that step two, CK, that has like 60%, it is step one.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I would say that they're incorporating more and more of like basic sciences into step two CK. So this is what I keep telling students. You need to have strong foundations for step one. Otherwise, you're just gonna bomb step two. It's like
Exactly. You'll
direct
just have to
correlation.
end up like working twice as hard for your step
Yeah.
two exam. Might
Yeah.
as well do it the first time around. I
First one.
understand there isn't a numerical score, but
Yeah.
make your foundation strong enough so that you don't have to struggle in your step
Yeah.
two.
Right. Right. And what is your opinion on the NBME exams?
So I did personally give the NBME exams. For me, the scores were quite inflated, but I really do think it's a good resource if you can afford to take
Mhm.
out the money for it. I understand it's like a luxury item. Not everyone needs to have them. I would suggest having at least the latest, two or three of the latest exams, the most predictive exams. I have mentioned them in my template, but I don't know when these people, whoever are watching these, are going to be watching this. So there might be new additions to it. So try to go on Reddit, try to find the latest and the most predictive exams. And you need two of those because you're gonna have one your free 120. One of those exams is gonna be your free 120. Add two NBMEs to that, the most predictive ones, add your UW essays. It should be good enough practice. But if you want more, I know some people who did a lot of NBMEs, it did help them.
Yeah.
I don't know how much it helped them. I would say maybe it would increase your score by 5 to 7 points. If that is very essential to you, then go for it. But since like step one isn't even numerical anymore, I don't think you should do it for step one. If you want to consider it for step two, it's a great resource. Along with CMEs as well, those are great resources. But I don't think for step one you really need to do that many NBMEs.
Yeah, NBMEs is basically, it has an entirely different sort of a language that I say NBME has the language of the USMLE. But when we're used to of doing UWorld, UWorld has an entirely different theme and
Yeah,
entirely different language. And when students sometimes shift to the NBMEs, they start to panic. They're like, this doesn't look familiar. So which is why
yeah.
I usually advocate that at least do a single NBME so that you can be familiar with the language of the USMLE.
Honestly, I found this was my personal opinion. I found NBMEs to be a little easier
Mhm.
than UWorld
Yeah.
and the actual exam,
Mhm.
which is why I personally think if you're going to do NBMEs, try to focus on the content that they're testing because that's probably a very highly tested
Yeah.
concept. Not so much the question structure that
Mhm.
might not show up, but the content that is being tested might probably, most
Yeah.
definitely show up. So that's one way to think about it when you're going for NBMEs.
Yeah. And like on the topic of scores, what should students do if they have low scores?
So I think scores in the grand scheme of things, it depends on what specialty you're applying to.
Mhm.
Um, you have to see the average. We have NRMP data, which tells you what your average match applicant scored, what they didn't score. So if you're falling somewhere beneath the average amount of score, I don't think there's any need to panic. It's
Mhm.
going to be a little harder, but it's completely doable. Just make sure you focus on the other aspects of
Mhm.
your application that you can change. Whenever you're applying to a program, this is how they categorize applicants, most of them.
Mhm.
So you're going to have like a set amount of score for each category, including your scores. So for
Mhm.
example, if someone has like, other than a few programs that requires you to have really great scores and they really focus on that, most programs have specific filters
Mhm.
and specific scoring categories. So I remember during one of my interviews, they mentioned that they put all of the applicants that have a 240 or above in one category. So you could have a 280, but you're going to score, that's the max you can score in that category. So for example, someone has a 280 and then they have 0 publications. In the publications category, they're going to score 0, no
Yeah.
matter what, no matter how high their score is, because they maxed out, right? Which is why I say try to have a well-rounded application. That is the best way to get more interviews. Try to have contacts. That helps you a lot. Low scores will hurt your chances, yes, but they don't eliminate your chances. You just need to make sure you do everything else perfectly so it can make up for the low scores.
And what about step 3? Did you give your step 3, and how important is step 3?
So I was in the process of studying for my step 3, I remember, and I was out of rotation. I spoke to the program director. This is what he recommended to me because I am someone who wants to pursue fellowship in the future. A lot
Mhm.
of us look at step 3 and we're like, oh, we just need to get it over with, right? We're done with step 1, step 2. You know, how much of an impact would your step 3 score have? Because it's honestly, we take step 3 very lightly. It's a
Yep.
quite tough exam. It's a 2-day exam. Um, and it's based on your clinical knowledge. So it's something that people usually don't score that high on. But the advice he gave me, especially for people who want to apply for fellowships, is that this comes up during your fellowship application. Some program directors look at it. So if I end up with like 250 pluses on both of my exams, and then like my step 3, I have like a bummer and it's a 220, that's going to reflect badly because that's a downward trend and it's quite a dip, right? Which is usually what happens to most people. So what he suggested was to try to focus on it more and try to incorporate. Now, this does not apply to everyone. I had good scores in my step 1, step 2, so I could afford the luxury of doing this. But if you feel like your step 1, step 2 scores are low, step 3 is a great way to augment it. Just make sure you don't do worse in your step
Yeah.
3 than your
Yeah.
step 1, 2, right? So if you try to get a high score in that, that can compensate. And if you want to go for an H-1B visa, that's, you know, a necessity, then you have to go for your step 3. But if you don't have any particular need to, I wouldn't say rush it. I would
Mhm.
say try to focus on it as much as you can. Try to build a good base for your step 3, which, you know, in turn year helps with a lot. So if those things you can keep in mind, I think it is very case specific, but for me, it didn't make sense at the time to give my step 3, which is why I delayed it a bit further.
But you did ultimately give it, or did you not give it?
No, I didn't give it then because I applied as a fresh grad and then I focused on my rotations and other aspects. I decided to go for research at that time. So I ended up not giving my step 3. So I'll be giving it soon, like in a few months.
Right. So, how much time do you usually have during residency to study for the step 3, or when is the deadline to give step 3 during residency?
I think for my program in specific, they've let us know that in June of your PGY2 year,
Mhm.
you need to have your results, like past result by then, which
Mhm.
is practically like you have 2 years, right?
Mhm.
Almost 2 years. But I would suggest that because you're doing your intern year, everything's going to be fresh in your mind. You've learned everything. I would suggest try to knock it out at the end of intern year if you
Yeah.
can. You'll have to see, you know, how your blocks are. If you have really tough blocks, then it probably won't be possible. But a lot of programs are very lenient with your step 3 studying period. They let you give it during elective, not even vacations, your electives. So they'll compensate you for
Mhm.
giving your step 3. This is also very program specific, but my program was very open about it that they're okay with me giving it during elective. So it'll still count as work for me, and they won't deduct time from my vacation. And also, a lot of programs provide compensation. I know the New York State provides up to $1,000, you know, cashback if you do end up giving your exam. So that's something you're considering because step 3 is also a very expensive exam. You can get it entirely reimbursed as well.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so let's move on to your US clinical experience. How many USCs did you have? How much time did you spend in the US? And like, let's also talk about the letters of recommendation that you got.
So I had like around 5.5 to 6 months of US clinical experience. That's also the maximum amount of
Yeah.
time you can spend in the US on a B1, B2 visa. That's something for people to keep in mind because it can become a problem later on. I did most of my rotations in university hospitals because I felt like the letter of recommendations held more weightage, but they also do hold more weightage if you spend a longer amount of time, like 3 months, you know, with the same preceptor, because then they get to know you really well. So I did rotations at Mount Auburn. Most of my rotations were in Boston. I did it at Mount Auburn, Beth Israel. Um, Other than that, I did some in New York as well, Chicago at Rush. So it was a little diverse, but I think I spent the most time in Beth Israel in cardiology because that was my future interest. So try your level best that if you're going to apply into internal medicine or applying into surgery, try to get rotations specific to your field, because if you're doing internal medicine rotations and you're applying for surgery, I don't know how that's going to translate
Yeah.
over in your CV, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. And it was honestly such great exposure because in Pakistan, we aren't used to uh, the way the teaching hospitals in US operate.
Yeah.
And it was my first time there. So I think I got to learn a lot, which is also why I'm a little, less nervous
Yeah.
starting residency, because at least I know how the framework goes.
Yeah.
And some of my rotations were electives and some of them were observerships. I know this is a huge myth that observerships don't count at all. It is like programs specifically mention it sometimes that, oh, observerships for us don't count as US clinical experience, but when I was applying, most of the programs I applied to didn't have had no objections to me doing my observerships and submitting letters from those observerships. It's just the way you frame it
Mhm.
in your CV and the letter of recommendations, what they mention. So I tried to do my level best and try to make the most of my time during my observerships. You should try to meet with your APD or program director if they have time. Try to mingle with everyone, get to know everyone. You have to be social. You have to get out of your comfort zone. That's how you get people to know you, and that's how you get people to remember you so that they send, I ended up getting interviews from almost every single place I rotated at just because I had made those extra efforts
Yeah.
during that time. So I would highly suggest to anyone who is going for observership selectives, don't try to just go and get it over with. That's not the point of it. That's not how you're going to get good letter of recommendations. You'll have to reach out to whoever you're rotating with. I spoke to my attending 2 to 3 days into the rotation and asked him about what he thought my trajectory was or what I should be focusing on during the rotation. And in the end, I asked him for feedback. So this way he remembered my journey throughout the rotation and was able to write about it in the letter of recommendation in a positive way because I had been putting in effort and he saw
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So that is something I would definitely emphasize. And as far as letter of recommendations go, don't ask them in at the very end. You might not find them. It's best to ask them in person. Try to do it somewhere in between. Hey, doctor, whatever the last name is, are you okay with writing a letter of recommendation for me? Is there anything you want me to do or you want to see me in any specific clinical setting where I could get a stronger letter of recommendation? Those are sort of the conversations you can have, which end up getting you a strong letter. And if there's anything you want me to improve on, that's something you can ask them. And make sure you're asking for the letter of recommendation like around July time, because I remember it took me almost 2 months to get all my letter of
Yeah.
recommendations
Yeah.
uploaded because the attendings are extremely busy and you cannot expect that you're going to send them an email and they're going to be like, yeah, whatever you want. So
Yeah.
it's going to take some time. So it's a slow process. It can get a little nerve-wracking at times, but just go with the flow, go steadily, and try to keep up with everything that's happening around you.
And also like a really important byproduct of USCs, or when we're talking about observership, is networking. From the discussion that we've had, you told me that like the initial um, electives or the initial observerships that you had were planned, and then later on you decided to talk to other physicians, and then you created a way out for yourself. So let's talk about that. Like talk about networking. Since you were really successful at networking and like finding opportunities for yourself after coming into the US. So guide us on how to manage that.
Yeah, so I didn't actually have like the only elective that I had planned was my first one.
Mhm.
Everything after that, which was like 1 month. So I had a 1 month time period to plan all of my other electives. I had tried networking from Pakistan. It hadn't been so successful. So my first rotation was actually through a third party.
Mhm.
So I ended up going for that rotation and I was in contact with the attending. What started working out was that another attending who I was doing research with for, over the past 6 months finally allowed me to observe him. That's something that's really important. The first time I reached out to him for an observership, he flat out said that, oh, that we don't have space and we can't accommodate you right now. And I was like, yeah, that's completely fine if I can do any research experiences with you. That really does go to show that you're malleable. You're really enthusiastic about working with the specific attending. So once you do the research projects with them and hopefully do a good job, now they have more of a reason
Yeah.
to, go out of their way for you, which he ultimately ended up doing. And I'm very grateful for that. So one of the ways to network and try to get electives is research. Try
Mhm.
to do research if you can. Remote research, sometimes people don't think it's important. It's
Yeah.
extremely important, and it's a very great tool for networking. So that's how one of my rotations was planned. Another one, while I was doing the rotation with the attending through the third party, I asked him, 2 weeks into it, if he knew of any other doctors, and one of his peers was working in a university hospital who had an opening. So he just linked me up with him. That's another way how I got it. And then it kind of just starts spiraling from there on. I would just, whoever I was rotating would just ask them if they knew of any opportunities. And they're usually very nice and they're willing to help as
Mhm.
long as they know that you are someone who's serious about what you're doing, and passionate about what you're doing. So I would suggest try to utilize these measures. And another thing that some of my friends did, and I found to be very successful, LinkedIn. Creating a LinkedIn profile, extremely essential. I cold emailed so many professors. I received like 0 responses on LinkedIn. My turnover rate was like 50%. Like 50%
Wow.
of the people replied, which
Yeah.
is quite, yeah, it was like, even if they couldn't help me something up, they were so kind. And they just gave me advice on how to best navigate this, which was extremely helpful in the long run. So I would say make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date. You can include a lot of things from your CV. It gives a good snapshot to the person who is viewing it, on whether or not you would be the right fit to be working with them. So I think that is a really, really nice resource that everyone should utilize.
Right. So we've got LinkedIn, and then we've also got MedTwitter. So MedTwitter is also really
Yeah.
helpful. You can look up a lot of new opportunities and how things are dynamically, changing. And also like Instagram, like people would be surprised how much Instagram is of use if you're following these programs and they come up with these opportunities and then they post about them. And if you even reach out to them through Instagram, you will have you will have a chance. In fact, that is how I got my virtual sub internship at Mount Sinai. It was they just posted about it on Instagram, and I was like, "Hey, I'm interested." And then they asked me about my details, and I got in. So you need
That's
to be
amazing.
following the right people and the right departments, and keep your eye out, keep your eye for all the opportunities that come up.
100%. I think for Instagram in specific, there are different associations that have been made or interest groups, especially specialty specific. So, for example, dermatology has its own, and they usually have mentorship programs running, mentor-mentee programs, and you can really get in touch with a lot of extremely qualified attendings that will help you from anything from your like personal statements, your ERAS CV, to even setting up electives. So it's very important to get involved in all of these things. Social media, I know, isn't for everyone, but personally, like I think I've spoken to you about this. Like Instagram has helped me connect with so many residents, so many attendings that I wouldn't have known otherwise. So it's honestly been such a great platform because there's so many people who want to help, but they don't have the platform to do so. And now you see them trying their best in different ways. And this is all part of networking. If you help each other out, maybe tomorrow they might have an opportunity that they can share with you.
You're talking about like giving the name a face. When you create these profiles, you're not just a name on an email. You're now a full person, and you also have your like your background written there in your profile. So you sort of become like a human and not a robot. In that,
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely. And sometimes, like, a lot of people are able to bond with you over your similar interests, which is also why, be a little careful about what you're sharing to your
Yeah,
social media
yeah.
platforms. That's something to keep in mind, especially when interview season rolls around. Some people have had problems just because they had posted some things. So that's just be mindful. Of course, share what you love, share what you're passionate about. Just be a little mindful because these are public platforms and you're prints are going to be there forever once you post it.
Yeah.
So that's just something to keep in mind.
Okay, so let's just segue into talking about ERAS, right? When should applicants start preparing their applications, and what would be the ideal timeline according to you?
I think that we're well underway into the application season. So for applicants that are going to be applying in the cycle, I would say start right away if you haven't. At the end, it becomes extremely overwhelming to get everything done. Is it impossible? Absolutely not. You can definitely do it, but I would really suggest not putting yourself under that pressure.
Yeah.
Try to get it started as early as possible. ERAS CV has a lot of components that you can knock out very fast, especially your clinical experiences that you've already done, any research experiences, publications. These are things that you can add to your CV well before time. Your person statement, you should be working on your drafts at this moment because it's not going. Sometimes I remember when I started brainstorming my person statement, I had a few rough ideas sketched out, and in the end, my person statement turned into something completely different than what I had initially started with. So that journey from start to finish is going to take a while. A lot of people are going to review your person statement with you and give you feedback. You will want to change things yourself as well. So allow yourself the time to make those changes and incorporate those changes, because your person statement is something that most programs are definitely going to go through and maybe talk about in your interviews. So it needs to be something that you give enough time to. Other than that, as far as your publications are concerned, try to get everything submitted during this time frame. If you wait till August, nothing's going to be published by September, right? Most of the journals have publication times that can span well over, even 6 months sometimes. So try to get those things done in advance. If you have something in works, you can also write that in your ERAS CV, but that's not going to come into the publication section. If you have any oral or poster presentations, try to send those to conferences that are happening prior to September, just because that's something additional you can add to your CV. Other than that, volunteer experiences, you can do those alongside, but try to incorporate all the really significant volunteer experiences that you've had over the past 5 years or 4 years of your med school. Try to incorporate those, and especially the ones you might have done like 50 volunteer experiences, right? So especially now that ERAS has a cap of 10 experiences that you can put, how do you select the ones that you should write about? For me, I think the most important thing was that these significant experiences were spoken about in almost every single one of my interview. So it needs to be something that holds, significance, not just for you, but when you speak about it in front of other people, it needs to be something that is of value and it added something to the community. So I would say that try to go for something you're passionate about that has helped the community as a whole. And it shows like a broader vision from your side. So if you have done like, a lot of people write about health camps, which are great, but if it was like a one-day health camp instead of something that you've done over the span of a month, I would really suggest going with the thing you did over a month, just because it's going to hold more significance and you can talk about your role in the particular scenario more. So these are just some things I think everyone should work on in regards to your ERAS CV. And just application-wise, I think something that everyone needs to take into account is ECFMG certification, especially for international medical graduates. That is an unpublished filter that a lot of programs have, unfortunately, which means that if you're not certified by the ECFMG prior to your application, you might get filtered out once they download your application forms. So I would suggest keeping at least a month for ECFMG certification, which means coming back from September, that by mid of August, you need to have your step 2 results. Because I know a lot of people are planning to give their step 2 at the very end. So try to keep that in mind. Try to keep in mind how long the step 2 results are going to take to process. And then if you have your OET, which please do not wait last minute to give your OET exams. I know already, especially in Pakistan, the seats are completely filled up, which a lot of people had issues with last time. So you don't want OET to be the reason that you're not able to, get ECFMG certified. Try to get all of these things booked and out of the way more than a month prior, so you have enough time for your ECFMD certification.
Right. I noticed that you mentioned that about research articles. So does it really matter if all of your articles are fully published, or can they be in the process too, that you've submitted them? Do they count as well, projects under submission, or if you're writing a manuscript, that's in process.
Yeah, so all your projects are going to be counted. It just will differ where you put your projects in your USCV. Publications are only materials that are completely published. I would suggest try to make sure none of your USCV, compartments go empty. So for publications as well, try to have as many publications as you can, at least more than zero. That is what, the way I was talking about categories earlier. So a lot of programs have the same categories for research publications, and the categories may fall like 0 to 5, more than 5. So majority of the people fall in between 0 to 5, and it's so easy to fall in between that because you just need to have one publication, right? So just try to make sure it doesn't matter if it's a case report. I get this question asked a lot. Oh, do case reports count? 100% they count. It's something you've worked on, especially if you're like in the first three authors. It is your project. And if you're able to speak about it clearly and convey what you were trying to achieve with the case report, then 100% it counts. Just go for it. It has less of a publishing timeline. The time to compose the entire thing is a lot less. So if you have a time crunch, try to go for a smaller case study, even letter to editors,
Yeah.
or poster presentations. These all count in your publications. So it's not that hard to get a 1 in that section, which is why I'm just emphasizing, please do not send any of your sections blank. That really does hurt your chances.
Mm-hmm. And so you were also a remote research fellow that you mentioned. So how did you get that opportunity? Was it voluntary? Were you getting paid for it?
Yeah, so that was a completely voluntary position, and I got it through networking. I have a senior from my program who's currently working as an associate program director. So I was able to connect with him, let him know of my research interests. He was very gracious about it, and he tried to get me involved in some projects. And that's the thing, if you do well in your first few projects, you're bound to get more.
Mhm.
Most of the people, especially who are doing research, are very gracious about their projects. They want to help as many people as they can, and they want to find out as many things as they can. So just try to reach out to people you know are involved in research, whether
Mhm.
that's at a local level in Pakistan or if it's international, wherever you're from. Try to get involved in research. Sometimes what happens is that we get involved in our school's research committees, schools boards, and if you do a well enough job, someone's going to refer you to a contact that they have internationally or in the US. So these are just small ways on how you can network, especially for someone who doesn't have any prior contacts. It's
Mhm.
not easy, but it doesn't have to be that hard either. So just start small and work your way.
Right. And like the advice for the applicants would be to find these opportunities via networking, and mostly because it would be their first time working with a research team. So it's most likely going to be a voluntary position and you're not gonna get paid. So this is also a really common question that I am getting this opportunity, but I'm not getting paid. Well, because obviously you don't have a really strong research profile. So just try and understand that them providing you the opportunity is a lot more for you, does a lot more for you than you are doing for them, right?
100%. And sometimes what happens is I know that a lot of people who were studying with me or seniors as well, what and they end up doing is going for a research position, an unpaid research position in the US, but after working for 1 year, because they've done a terrific job,
Yeah.
if they want to extend it, they get paid for the next year. So that's also something you guys can work towards. But I understand, monetary concerns are very real. It's very hard. I don't think research years abroad are for everyone. So these remote opportunities exist. It's just that you have to try to find them, and it's mostly through networking. So reach out to people that have published research in your field of interest. You can reach out to them on ResearchGate, LinkedIn, Google Scholar. These are all sites that researchers use very regularly, and a lot of them sometimes post that they're looking for other research mentees for these positions. So you can always avail those opportunities.
Great, great. Let's also talk about your house job. So this is also a really common question. Should applicants do house job? Should students after they've graduated do their house job? Did you do your house job?
So I did my internal medicine part of my house job. I didn't do anything else, and I did leave after internal medicine. The whole point of me doing internal medicine house job was just to get a little acclimatized with how to work as an intern, so it isn't that big of a surprise when I start residency. But for me, that was possible because I had already given my step exams. So that's something to keep in mind. House job is extremely tough. I personally wouldn't have been able to study for my steps while
Yeah.
doing house job. It is something that you probably should omit. Like, it honestly doesn't help you if you are 100% sure that you're going to the US and you're well underway and all your career plans are according to that, which is a big risk, mind you. Like, there is no guarantee that you're going to match. Then yeah, you could skip house job, or if you're given your exams prior and you already, like, I had started getting my interviews during my house job tenure, which is why I was able to, I had a good idea of how many interviews I was going to get, after which I was like, oh, okay, the chances of me matching seem pretty positive, which is why I can, quit from my position. But not everyone has that sort of a timeline. So if you think that you might not match or your application doesn't seem that strong, then I would highly suggest going for house job just as a backup. This is also going to be, every person's going to be different. Their goals are going to be different. Their backup options are going to be different. So if that's something that you guys are considering, keeping Pakistan as a backup option, then do house job. But if you have maybe PLAB in your mind and you want to go to UK as a backup, there's no point in doing house job unless like specified by that particular unifying body. I don't know how it is for the UK. Like, do you need a year of
Yeah,
after
yeah.
management?
You need a permanent license for UK, for
Oh,
GMC registration. So I think for people who want to keep UK as a backup, they
yeah.
definitely need a house job for that.
Yeah. So if your unifying body needs house job as a requirement, then you'll have to go for it. US doesn't, but then again, there's no guarantee you're going
Yeah.
to get into the US system. So just keep those things in mind. But then again, I would suggest give your steps early so that you have a good enough window where you're not forced to do a house job and you can focus on other aspects of your application.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. Okay, so let's talk about an area where I think you can shed a light on, which is the couples match. And a lot of people have a lot of confusion regarding the couples match. We've heard sometimes people say that it hurts your chances of matching into a residency. So could you please shed some light on the benefits and potential drawbacks of couples matching from your experience?
So I think um, this is something that I'm very passionate about because I was misguided regarding couples match a lot by a lot of people. So I was told that couples matching is going to hurt my chances and I should be applying as an individual, which is the most furthest from the truth. It helped us in more ways that I can even explain. Every single program that heard that we were applying as a couple was extremely kind. So as to for me and my husband, we had applied or sent our signals to completely different programs. And when one of us let the other person's program know that, oh, I'm applying as a couple, my wife's interested, they almost immediately sent an interview to the other candidate, which is, it's
Yeah.
amazing. I didn't imagine that I was going to be like this, but it was so fast. And most of the programs had noted down my partner's name the day he had interviewed and mentioned it during the interview. Oh, you're his wife, he was a fantastic candidate. It's so nice to hear that. And it's like, for me, it was so supportive when I heard that because it made me feel like, oh, that also helps my chances because if he had a good interview, what are the chances they're going to put me really low
Yeah.
down,
Yeah.
knowing that I'm applying as a couple? So I think in that manner, it's extremely beneficial. It does increase, for me, us at least, it increased the number of interviews we had by almost 50%, which
Oh,
is a
wow.
huge amount.
Wow.
Which is why I would say that that is also like keeping in mind that my husband and I had very similar profiles. So our scores were pretty much around the same area. So for example, if one person in the couple has like a 270 and the other has a 210, I'm not sure that's going to be
Yeah.
helping, because that's just going to be hurting one person's chances, maybe helping the other person out. But I would suggest apply as a couple if your scores are similar. I don't mean like you both need to have the exact same score, but like 230, 250, 240, 260, something like that. That's just going to help both of you. And also, programs are now preferring people coming in as couples. First of all, you don't need to be married to be a couple. Even as friends, like, best friends, you can just apply. It's just a way to stay together or match into the same place. Couples are being preferred just because now with knowing how the mental health crisis has hit our healthcare community, a lot of programs are very cautious about having interns that have good support systems, which is why if you have family in the place or relatives in the place or seniors in the same program, they try to look at your application more than someone who doesn't have any connections. So if you're coming in with your spouse, and like my husband and I matched to the same program, but in different, so he matched to diagnostic radiology and I matched to internal medicine. So there was communication between the two different departments as well. And I remember my husband telling me that the chief resident mentioned to him that, oh, I'll vouch for your wife if she wants to come into internal medicine, which means that it's a big deal when you apply as a couple, but just make sure you let them know, because
Yeah.
not all of them will check your application to see whether or not you're applying as a couple. So what we did was, during all of our interviews, we mentioned the fact that my husband is going to have his interview or already had his interview. And then they were able to connect the dots. A lot of them communicate in between departments. Sometimes if you're applying to the same department, they look at that very favorably as well, because that means that you're probably going to stay here and you
Yeah.
want to come here, especially if you've both gotten the interview. So I think that just make sure both of your applications are well diverse and well put together. Apply as a couple, apply timely, let the other programs know, send them letters of interest, especially if your husband or wife or your partner wants to get into the same program. And another thing to keep in mind is that not every program is also going to be like this. I understand I'm talking about it very positively just because my experience has been like this, but I also know some seniors who weren't able to successfully couples match. But if you don't couples match and you go completely unmatched, if you make the list right, you were never going to match anyway. So it doesn't hurt your chances. It just improves it. You have nothing to lose, which is why I don't understand why people say it hurts your chances. If you say that, you probably don't know how to make the list properly. It's an algorithm, and you have the no match code included in it, which means that if one partner does not match, the other one can still match, which is
Mm.
why I don't think it hurts your chances at all. Just talk about it beforehand. Obviously, you both might not get your number one programs. That's a compromise you'll have to make, but that's for you to decide, right? What your preference is. For us, our number one preference was to stay together. And then number two was to get into the best program possible. For some people, it might be different, and you can make your list according to that. So even if you wanted to be, technically, if you wanted to be at different programs, like on both sides of the country, you could do that. You could ensure that with the couples match. So I think it's a very, very good tool, and anyone who can utilize it should. It only helps you. But just keep in mind all the drawbacks that I mentioned as well, and do your research before you apply for it. Just because, like, if you don't get an interview from a program that your husband interviewed at, it might hurt his chances slightly, just because they know he was applying as part of the couples match, which is why he's going to prefer programs where he's interviewing as a couple above their program. So
Yeah.
that's like just one of the few drawbacks, but I think like the pros really outweigh the cons, and the rate for successful matches for couples is quite high. So just keeping all of these things in mind, I think it's a great opportunity and everyone should avail it if they can.
That is exceptional advice. I mean, you've also cleared a lot of doubts that people would have. I mean, I didn't know this much about couples match and how, how positive it is, instead of like being this negative thing that people talk about hurting your chances and everything. So I think that clears the air about it a lot. Let's move on to a bit of a fun part. Let's do a rapid fire. So you need to respond with either a true or like fake news. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so the first one, a low USMLE score will kill your chances of matching.
Fake news.
Fake news. Okay. Year of graduation is in the top 3 most important aspects.
I would say like it's the fourth, so fake news.
Fake news. Okay. Couples match affects your chances of getting matched. Fake news.
Completely.
Completely
Completely.
fake news. Okay. Only candidates with a lot of connections match.
Uh, so I don't think only, but yeah, it's a significant amount. I would say like this is somewhere between fake news and like it's true. So like just somewhere in between.
But I would say that it does gravitate towards truth a lot more, though. Like if you
Sometimes.
if you don't have any connections in the US, that's gonna hurt you a lot.
Yeah, but like then again, it's not only, right?
Yeah,
You
it's
still
not.
can that.
Yeah,
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 but like 100%. I think it's like right there in between where I would be like, that's a tough one.
that's a tough one. Okay, 3 months US clinical experience is essential.
True.
True. Okay.
Yeah,
You will not get interviews if you don't submit your application by September.
that's fake news. Yeah.
Fake.
Yeah, so my husband actually missed that deadline and
Okay.
he submitted most of his LORs like later.
Mhm.
But he had more interviews than I did. And I submitted it well on time. So I think it is fake news, but 100% please submit it on time if you can. Unless it's like a huge emergency and you
Yeah.
don't have your application complete, only then think about it, or maybe add to it later. But
Mhm.
super essential.
Mhm.
Submit it on time, submit it on time.
Put it on time. Okay. The next one is do not use letters of recommendation from your home country.
Fake news. No, 100%. That's like, especially considering your IM-SCL for us, IM applicants, that holds incredible weightage, and that is from your home country, from the chief of your department. So some programs require it, like that's a 100% requirement. You're not eligible to apply there if you don't have it. So I think your home country letters are very important, especially if they're good letters.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Okay. The last one, research quantity over research quality.
Fake news. If you have one paper, but it's really good quality and it's published in a well-reputable international journal, you're not going to have an issue, especially if you're applying to, internal medicine or areas where you don't need a lot of research articles. If you have 10 research articles, but all of them you cannot speak about properly and they're published in local journals, it's not really going to hold that much weightage. So try to focus on quality. Quantity is important, but like try to get at least one out. That's what I mean by
Yeah.
quantity is important. And yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so this was the rapid fire round. I think you did pretty well in this. Props to you. And I'll wrap this interview up by asking you to give us a piece of advice that you would give your younger self who just started this USMLE journey. What is the advice that you wish you knew?
I think I would definitely tell my younger self that it'll be okay. And I'm not alone in this. Thankfully, I had a really, really supportive group around me. This process is so tedious, it's so nerve-wracking, but at times, even when you're surrounded by a lot of people, you feel very alone because you constantly compare yourself to everyone. And that's not just our fault. I think sometimes the environment that's been created, and especially for international grads, where everything needs to be a comparison. Oh, this person has this much of a score, they're doing so well, so you keep trying to look at yourself through their lens and seeing, oh, how their journey is so much easier or they're doing so much better. But everyone has an individual path. I've seen people with amazing scores not match and people with low scores match in amazing places. So your journey is going to be yours alone. It might take you longer than the person who is sitting next to you, but you will end up where you need to be, and it's going to be fine. Just focus on yourself. Don't think about what anyone else is doing. Try to take their advice, but do what works best for you. So that's something I would definitely, let my younger self know, and let everyone who's coming into this field know. Don't worry about it. It's going to be fine.
Well, there's nothing else to say. That was a really soothing advice, I would admit. Thank you so much, Dr. Subaina Khalid, for your time. I really appreciate you coming here. I had a great time, learned a bunch from you, and looking forward to seeing you progress in your residency.
Thank you so much. I really hope this helps clarify a lot of questions that people have, and you're doing such a great job by providing this platform. And I think, if anyone wants to reach out for individual advice, my Instagram is always open. Hopefully, I will be answering a lot of questions for you guys over there as well. But thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much.